Hello, everyone. Ian Hamilton with Good Virtual Reality here, and thanks for giving us your time today. In case you're new here, you can become a subscriber at goodvirtualreality.com. Many episodes of this podcast head out over email first to paid subscribers before publishing everywhere. Thank you to my founding members, paid subscriber sponsors, and the donations I've received, supporting the production of this independent journalism directly. Today, I'm joined by Raven Zachary, who has a super long history in technology, for a conversation about everything from Apple to Snap to Android XR and more. Raven, where are you tuning in from today, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Ian. I'm in Portland, Oregon, on the northwest coast of the United States. For those of you not listening from North America, I am across a very large ocean from Japan on the U.S. coast, just south of Canada.
And you've been involved in a lot of things over the years. Why don't you give us a brief rundown of what you've been involved in?
Yeah, happy to do it. Let me focus primarily on spatial computing. I think that's of most interest to your listeners. So back in the summer of 1990, I was a 17-year-old in between my junior and senior year of high school. I was spending that summer in a concert band organized by the community I lived in, a little town called Mount Vernon, Iowa, in the Midwest. And during a section of rehearsing Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, when the conductor was spending a lot of time with the pianist doing rehearsals of some very complex parts, I was pretty bored on stage as a percussionist, and someone had left a copy of Rolling Stone magazine on stage. And this was the one, many of you probably have read this article with Jaron Lanier of VPL Research. I think it was Stephen Levy who did the interview. It has Sinead O'Connor on the cover. I since went back and bought a copy of that on eBay a few years ago, just because it was my first step into spatial computing. The interview with Jaron Lanier blew my mind as a 17-year-old, and looking at what the future might hold for me, exiting school, going to college, and being interested in technology. It just so happened that the next summer, a company called Virtuality was having a traveling demo of a game, a multiplayer VR game called Dactyl Nightmare, that you would stand inside of this pedestal area with another player, and you'd play a two-player first-person shooter. And there was a pterodactyl, hence the name Dactyl Nightmare, that could swoop down at any point and attack either player. And somehow I was able to convince a friend of mine who had a car to drive 2 hours to the closest location so I could try it out, and was blown away. This was very early CRT-based VR, and it was very primitive, but it was certainly a eye-opener for me. I had the opportunity in the mid-90s to work at Los Alamos National Lab, and was doing technology research and technology work with the scientists. I did have a security clearance, but virtually all the work I did at that time was around non-secure video teleconferencing, desktop computing. I ran the Apple Newton pilot program for the lab, which was really fun. We even put in our own GSM tower to do work with Motorola on having a distributed telecommunications network on campus for the version of the Newton that Motorola licensed and had a GSM chip in it for cellular communication. It just so happens that a guy across the hall from me was doing research into augmented reality. I'd never heard the term. This was in the 1996, 1997 timeframe. Very primitive geometric objects in physical space with some basic overlays. It blew my mind. I had certainly been aware of the digital world on the physical world. And at that time, the internet boom, the dot-com boom happened. I ended up doing a career for 10 years in the internet. And then after that, in the open source community, I was an open source technology analyst looking at the disruptive impact of open source technologies on consumer software markets, working with big vendors like Microsoft and Oracle, as they saw products like MySQL and Linux and these other open source products come to market for free. And it was disrupting their business models, and they were trying to figure out how to work with open source. To what extent do they contribute? To what extent do they compete? And now, of course, virtually all of these companies have embraced open source widely, which was the right decision for them to do. When Apple announced the iPhone in January of 2007 at Macworld, I happened to be there in the audience. At the time, I was doing some freelance journalism with Macworld magazine and a Mac Week magazine, and was blown away by the power of the iPhone and decided to organize an event called iPhone Dev Camp. We held the first event in the summer of 2007, a week after the launch of the first iPhone. As a reminder, that first iPhone did not have a native SDK, so we were only doing web development at that time. It was hosted at Adobe, which was an interesting place to run it, because at the time they were heavily lobbying Apple to include Flash on board iPhone. We know from that period of time that Steve Jobs was very much opposed to it due to the battery drain and the memory utilization of Flash. They did not have a good implementation of a miniature mobile Flash at that time. That led to me working on a bunch of different iPhone and iPad apps for big brands. And in 2009, we held the event, and this is why it's relevant to spatial computing. In 2009, we held the event at Yahoo. It was our biggest event ever, over 600 iPhone developers. And a very talented developer by the name of Zach White, who has a company now called Velos Mobile, actually invented the first augmented reality developer toolkit for mobile. And this was before Wikitude. This was before the well-known entry in August of 2009. There was an app on the App Store called the Metro Paris Subway that would help with navigation. But everyone thinks of Wikitude as kind of the first major augmented reality play. But that was later in 2009. So kudos to Zach White, I think, for having the first ever mobile augmented reality developer toolkit invented in July of 2009. And he doesn't get any credit for it. He should, but we certainly have documentation to prove that it was probably the first mobile AR kit. He called it AR kit at the time. Of course, Apple now uses that term officially for their developer kit, but it was called AR kit and open sourced back in the summer of 2009. I went on to my company was called Small Society. It was sold to Walmart. I spent 3 years at Walmart building out their mobile product development team. And during that time, I was trying to figure out what to do next. And in March of 2014, Facebook surprisingly acquires Oculus. I didn't initially get involved in the first Kickstarter for the DK1, but I certainly went ahead and purchased in July of 2014 the DK2. I attended the SVVR conference down in Silicon Valley just to get a sense for the VR community and to what extent it might be something I wanted to pursue professionally as I was looking at ways to exit having sold my company to Walmart and ready to move on to the next thing. And, there were some things about the VR community in 2014 that I really connected with, and there was a bunch of stuff I didn't. The first question, the thing that sticks with me to this day, 12 years later, was the keynote at SVVR. The first question from the audience was about the adult entertainment business, aka porn. And just the invalidation from that first question of how, half the people in this audience are venture capitalists, entrepreneurs looking at VR as an opportunity. And here comes the first question from the audience, and it's about adult entertainment. And I just, face palm moment where you're like, come on, like for this industry to be taken seriously, we need to lead with something other than adult entertainment. Obviously, that's a very small percentage of the conversation, but it was not a great way to start out my experience with the broader VR community. Really appreciated my time with the DK2. There's some things that were really magical, but the screen door display was a distraction. Some things were frustrating about setting up a gaming PC and all the drivers, and it clearly wasn't consumer ready. All of these pieces you had to plug in and USB cables, and it was a mess, but it was also very magical at the same time of being a mess. And so I stuck with it. In January of 2015, I co-founded the Portland Virtual Reality Meetup with Kent Bai. Kent Bai, who many of you know as the host of the Voices of VR podcast, also lives in Portland. We have a fun group here in Portland of people in the spatial computing industry. So we started that event, ran that for over a year. But my heart just wasn't in VR as a commercial pursuit. I started to have serious doubts about VR as the thing I wanted to do. And it just so happens that in January of 2015, Microsoft surprisingly does a one more thing on a Windows press briefing where they announced HoloLens. And I was on Twitter at the time, and one of the tech reporters I was following said, oh my God, Microsoft just announced a spatial computing device at this jump on the live stream. So I jumped on the live stream and caught most of the announcement in January 2015 and knew this is exactly what I wanted to do, that HoloLens was the vision that most connected with me around spatial computing. And that is augmenting the physical world with digital data and also taking a non-consumer angle, looking at the business opportunities to improve, work processes and just so many opportunities there. Got really excited. And it just so happens that day, a friend of mine, Michael Hoffman, announced on LinkedIn once the Microsoft employees who were working secretly on this project for the last couple of years could actually speak about their endeavor. And he was commuting from Portland to Seattle, which is about a 4-hour commute on a good day and about a 6-hour commute on a bad day. And he was commuting up, basically staying there for the week and coming back on Thursday evenings. And I said, hey, let's start a HoloLens company, and was able to convince him to leave Microsoft. And we ended up being one of the first 8 preferred agency partners with Microsoft. We had a company called Object Theory. That's how, Ian, you and I met. I think at the time you were covering the spatial computing space as a freelance journalist and covered some of the work that we were doing early on in that space in 2016. Went through the Holographic Academy. Microsoft did this amazing program for their first 8 agency partners where they brought the teams into a training program over the course of about 9 months. We graduated from that program and started working with a variety of customers, CDM Smith in construction and engineering, Stryker on the medical side. Microsoft actually ended up doing quite an impressive showcase video for the work we did with Stryker on designing operating rooms. Also worked with Microsoft a lot. We did work on the AltSpace VR project while we were there. We worked on some of the holographic remoting and streaming technologies. We built 3 standalone apps for the HoloLens store for them. One was called Solutions Showcase for mixed reality, where you could build these little vignettes, spatial computing vignettes without actually having to code in Unity. Another one called Quality Fundamentals, where we talked about optimizing how you optimize your assets and performance to get a good frame rate on the device. And then another one called Designing Holograms, where we looked at best practices in design. Unfortunately, due to Microsoft's focus and COVID, the industry, at least the HoloLens industry, did not have a soft landing. We, like many of the others, had a great initial start. We had some great clients the first few years, but by 2020, with COVID, and Microsoft's difficult launch of HoloLens 2, which had some initial display issues, and they had to recall devices, unfortunately, and fix those display issues, which they did. They did a really good job at diagnosing the issues with the MEMS display, these laser displays that they had picked for the second generation HoloLens, but the market just wasn't there. Companies now had to go into lockdown. They had to send their employees home, and all that innovation budget funding that would normally go to things like spatial computing was going towards things like laptops and video cameras so that employees could work from home. And so we shut the company down, and I did an acqui-hire with a startup called Around that was doing work in the professional sports industry. And I got to do a lot of fun stuff with phone-based AR in stadiums and also camera-based AR, where you would basically get positional data from these PTZ cameras. There's a protocol called FREED, F-R-E-E-D, which sends real-time UDP data and allows you to synchronize motion of your camera in a development toolkit like a Unity or an Unreal or a WebGL or WebVR to be able to move a camera in real time and position locked holographic or augmented reality objects on the field. So we got to work with the Los Angeles Rams and the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Oakland Athletics and some other teams at the time. Just fascinating stuff working in stadium augmented reality. I think the highlight was we had 75,000 people involved in a holographic or an augmented reality snowball fight from their phones while the camera feeds were showing on the Jumbotron. It was a ton of fun. If you had told me 10 years ago that I would attend every Rams home game in 2024, I would have laughed out loud. I was down in LA, I think in 2024, 18 trips from Portland to LA. But to do things at the scale of 75,000 people that are looking at spatial computing on the largest Jumbotron in the world was a great honor and just an amazing experience to look at AR outside of traditional form factors. Then just to kind of wrap it up, I know I've been going long on the background, but there's just a lot to cover here for context with the listeners. Went to Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference in June of 2023. There were a lot of rumors at that time about a launch. I put in for the lottery. It was pretty clear from other friends who were picked in the lottery that they were over-inviting people in the spatial computing industry. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Something clearly was going to get announced based on who was getting invited. They have a lottery system, but Apple generally will go in and kind of cherry pick before the lottery people they want to make sure get tickets. So I was there for the launch of Apple Vision Pro, was super excited about that. Once that launched, we did another developer camp down in Silicon Valley, 125 people in March of 2024. Follow that up with some work at AWE on an all-day session called Vision Workshop in 2024, and then went out to MIT Reality Hack in January of 2025 to be the lead mentor on Apple Vision Pro for that hackathon, which was a lot of fun. Then to kind of wrap it up, kind of leading us to the present, in September of 2025, I launched a website called raven.vision, largely because Apple took away the ability for people to get a what's new list of apps. Back when the App Store launched for iPhone and iPad, you could go to a section that would just list chronologically all of the new apps that had come out for the iPhone and the iPad. And it was really useful when you're trying to track a market, but they turned that feature off. And so when Apple Vision Pro launched, it wasn't available. And so I built an app that essentially uses the iTunes API to go and figure out what the new apps of the day were. And so you can think of Raven.Vision as a link aggregator of apps, test flight links for beta testing, news, press releases, YouTube videos, all about Apple Vision Pro. And then just a few weeks ago, in my excitement for the upcoming launch of Snap Specs, sometime in the fall, I created a version of Raven.Vision at the raven.vision/specs URL for tracking what's going on with Snap Specs, because it's hard to get information right now. We're in kind of this quiet period as Snap is preparing to launch Specs 27 sometime in the fall. So that's my very long-winded background on spatial computing. Thanks for hanging in there for that. But I think it will create some context for the conversation to follow.
Yes, I definitely needed that. And I think we're going to have a robust conversation here about the twists and turns of this industry. We might have connected before Object Theory, or at least I knew your name, I think, back with the iPhone Dev Camp days.
Great.
And I don't know if I saw your name associated with the Obama app
Yes.
back in 2008, but I mean, that was the beginning of sort of the rise of iPhone apps. One of my first jobs out of college was for appadvice.com. I did blog posts there for just a few dollars a blog post, but I remember reaching out to I think his name was Joe Hewitt at Facebook.
Yes,
and,
he was at our first iPhone Dev Camp, and he was at Facebook prior to that.
Yeah, so I remember reaching out to him and can you send me an invite, or can I get access to the latest version of the Facebook app? And I think he replied something like, "Yeah, I don't like TechCrunch, so you get access to it," and had an exclusive one of his first versions of the Facebook app. And you go back and you dig into the history like that, and I remember, I don't know if you can remember that app, but you could tap and hold on the different squares that were on the original Facebook app and move them around the interface.
Yes.
So it ended up being very much like a iPhone app store within an app store type feel from the very outset. And, that sort of thing is always in the back of my mind whenever I see anything Meta's trying to do. Right.
Yeah.
They're always trying to create a layer on top of everyone else's layers, and they do it in a lot of different ways. But yeah, there's some parallel history here that we can go into, and just, man, you think about that rise of iPhone apps, this new platform that emerged overnight, and then you've got things like VR headsets coming around 2012, then the HoloLens and Magic Leap efforts, same period really. And my heart has always and probably will always be in virtual realities. There's two reasons my heart is sort of in VR. First is it's a place I can go, and it's a place like no other. I spend a lot of time sitting around here going, is there any medium that can match this? And no. I talk to these artists who do this because they can make a piece of art and then go inside of it. And that's pure magic to me. That's reason number one. And then reason number two is a much more complicated kind of economic industry thing. I really only feel like one architecture for optics is going to win, and only one type of optical path is going to achieve mass market economics. They're going to start churning out enough of the displays from the factory to start lowering the price and actually reach an affordable form factor. And I believe that's going to be VR headsets. And I think in 2024, when we saw Apple come out with these 4K displays for the Vision Pro, and 2023, when we first saw the headset, it's like they reached a few years into the future and brought a technology back to the present that was too expensive, too heavy, but it had all the pieces we really need to really do an impressive computing platform, a whole computing platform all in one. And I went on the AI XR podcast, and I talked to Roni Abovitz a little bit over there from Magic Leap, and was chatting with him back and forth on like, it's hysterical when you look back at it that you understand why so many executives would look at augmented reality and these see-through optics as being a no-brainer. You don't get cut off from the physical world when you wear them. And that makes a lot of sense. So the way I framed it when I was talking on that podcast to Ronnie, it gets something for free that Apple had to spend a significant software and processing budget on, which is people detection. So, it's in the menu of the Vision OS. From the very outset, you can go turn on people so that you can see them through your environment, through all apps, or through everything, or turn that off so people can't interrupt your immersion. It's the only headset in more than 15 years of development here that actually cares enough to keep you aware of other people who are trying to talk to you or even look at you while you're in your VR headset. And HoloLens, Magic Leap, Snap Specs, Xreal Aura, all these open periphery designs, they all get that for free. They don't have to spend any processing budget on it, any software to do it, and you get to see the people that are in the same room with you. So I can understand why executives get hyped up about augmented reality, why HoloLens happened, why Magic Leap happened, why it raised so much money. But also there is this reality with the Vision Pro that seems like it's going down that path that if one or two other manufacturers start using the same displays that Apple is pulling in to use for the Apple Vision Pro. I went through this with Avi Barziv on an earlier podcast where Apple spends a couple years reducing the cost of its tooling and figuring out how to do things cheaper. And they figure out how to put these displays into a headset that's much less cost, that's much less weight. And then let's say a couple other manufacturers also take those displays. You can start imagining a market where this isn't just $3,500 devices. This is more like $2,000 devices or $1,500 devices that do all the software things that this $3,500 device does. And now you've got 4K displays that are like, there's a couple apps now. Jigsaw Night is the one that comes to mind where that developer just launched a companion app for Vision Pro. This very same app runs on Quest 3, and you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, and the jigsaw puzzle looks fantastic on the Vision Pro. And then you go and pop it open on the Quest 3, and you can see the resolution drop really, really vividly. You can see the loss in contrast because it's not an OLED display. And those things matter when the display is responsible for all of your reality. I've just had a little bit of time here to talk as well, sort of in response to your very big history lesson there of where you've been and being introduced to augmented reality back in the mid-90s, virtual reality before then. I'm trying to lay out for you sort of why my heart and my mind are both sort of invested in this slow, methodical buildup of virtual reality over the course of decades, and why I'm still so darn skeptical, even looking at the Snap specs of just, I'm not seeing it. I don't see what the specs do that HoloLens and Magic Leap didn't already try. What do you want to say to all that?
Wow, let's start at the what's in your heart, which is the thing that matters most, right? A place you can go. And I totally respect that. I've had some very magical, perhaps even mystical experiences in VR over the years, right? But when I think of that as a percentage of my time in headset, those types of experiences are a fraction of my desire to go out into the world and augment my life with things digitally in my physical world. Now, whether that's going to be a pass-through or a see-through display ultimately comes down to economics, and there's also a safety factor, right? If I ultimately am going to be able to drive someday with, legislation approved for me to have something like a self-contained glasses, augmented reality, or spatial computing device on my face while driving, for things like navigation and heads-up display and everything else, I need to know that if the device crashes, that I'm not going to have a black display in front of my eyes, right? There's going to need to be a transparency mode. And I know there are some companies working on transparent OLEDs and other things, but we have to solve a safety problem if you want to use these devices in a place that people are in motion, even walking. walking down the street and there's a pothole.
I had Alvin Wang Graylin from HTC on the podcast recently. He echoed those exact sentiments. He was arguing, and it's very logical. It goes back to this very straightforward logic saying that if you get a pair of prescription corrected AR glasses and they run out of power, you still get value out of the device that's on your head. You still get prescription vision with zero power running through the device. And that makes sense. But I do have more to respond to there when we come back around. I think it's an unfair comparison, but go ahead.
Yeah. So a couple other quick thoughts on what you had to say. There's this great research study. I wish I had the reference to share with the listeners, where they brought a Hindu meditator and a Zen Buddhist meditator in, and they hooked them up to biofeedback. And every random interval of time, the researcher would come in and ring a bell. And what they saw was that every time that the Hindu meditator heard the bell ringing, the impact to their focus and concentration during meditation increased. They were less impacted by the bell being rung. They found a deeper space to go to that was transcendental and away from the physical world, right? They were able to capture their focus and their intent and stay in that kind of mindful space, which very much kind of resembles the Hindu meditation practice, where you're kind of trying to separate yourself from physical reality and have kind of a transcendental or mystical experience. Whereas Zen Buddhist, the goal is to be of the world, end all human suffering, and be physically aware and present at all times. And so every time that researcher came in and rang the bell, the spike in the biofeedback was at the equal level, because the goal of the Zen Buddhist meditator was to stay as aware as possible of their surroundings. And I use that sometimes as the kind of the VR versus AR argument. Not to say that one is superior to the other, but there's just two different ways of approaching it. I think about my wife. My wife has had a few interesting experiences in VR, but she's had dozens of amazing experiences in AR. And for her, she has virtually no interest in VR. And I would say that it would be too simplistic for me to say that that's a gender issue. It's much more complicated than that. But I think there's a lot of people in the world who have limited interest in VR. And so when you think about markets and economics and venture capital and business problems you're trying to solve, right? Money goes to solving things that generally are going to be physical in nature, processes on automotive assembly line, aerospace, medical, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's probably the bigger share of the market. Not to say that you can't have a profound experience in VR. You have a lot.
Well, so there is some complicating factors here, right? You can also get AR through VR, right? There is, of course, pass-through. That is the major selling point of these latest devices. So you can have pass-through. It's not necessarily, at least in the current generation, as optically correct. And there's some major limiting factors to AR through VR, in addition to the idea that if the power goes out, you're now stuck looking at a black screen. But a couple other things here. There was Michael Abrash. I cornered him. It was not long before Apple revealed the Vision Pro. I went out to Meta's research headquarters up there in your neck of the woods. Michael Abrash, for those that aren't aware, is sort of Meta's head of research. He was hired from Valve. I don't want to speak, oversimplistic about what his transfer there was, but it was lured to Facebook by the promise of Mark Zuckerberg putting in the billions of dollars of research necessary to solve the really, really hard problems of spatial computing. And so he was basically given the promise of being able to hire all the researchers he could dream of to actually find out what the problems are to make this market possible. And that's what helped him leave Valve for Meta. And so I've just tried the Quest Pro for the first time, and we're doing a tour of the facility, and he's got a wall of all their research prototypes behind him. They call these things time machines, so that they can sort of peek into the future and get an idea of what will be valuable in the future. HDR, wide field of view, varifocal optics, so that the focusing looks right. And I pull out my iPhone and I start recording him, and I ask him, a lot of people get confused about whether VR headsets are just a stepping stone to AR glasses. They think it's sort of like a transition thing. And can you clarify for me what you see as the future? And he effectively says he sees VR headsets and AR glasses as being both equally important for a very, very long time. And he goes down to explain it as like the AR glasses are theoretically the replacement for your phone, and the VR headsets are replacement for your personal computers. That makes a lot of sense to me logically and on a couple different levels, that way of framing things. There's a couple things that complicate it. I think our phones are going to be incredibly hard to replace. Now, laptops and personal computers, PCs, have proved incredibly hard to replace as well.
Right.
But in the grand scheme of things, I think it's going to be easier to replace the laptops and the PCs than it is to replace the phone. The phone is getting thinner, more powerful every single year. It's just going to be extraordinarily hard to transition people to this idea that they're wearing spatial optics and driving cars and walking down the street and getting distracted while they're looking at people directly in front of them. There's enormous software issues to solve, privacy issues to solve, all those things we debate about all the time. But in the grand scheme of things, when I turn on Mac Virtual Display and my screen turns off on the laptop in front of me, I start wondering why my Vision Pro doesn't run Mac apps natively. And I start thinking, wait a second, if you just turn the Moore's Law gear one more time and you stuff another 3 billion transistors into this chip that's on my face, that should be enough horsepower to have those Mac apps run completely natively right inside the headset. Now the Mac Virtual Display is virtual, right? Like there is no physical computer nearby. Maybe I need a keyboard. Maybe I'm typing on a flat surface if I don't have a physical keyboard. But it feels like we could get there in the very near future. And the Vision Pro M2, Vision Pro M5 are the DK1 and DK2 of Apple's ecosystem. And you give it just a little bit more and you actually have a Mac on your face. And then you start replacing a certain segment of Mac purchases, right? Some people don't go out and get a Mac next year because they have a thinner vision headset that has enough horsepower to not just do the people detection, not just do room detection, but also to run whole Mac apps without the nearby device.
Yeah, a bunch of thoughts. One of them is, remember that Abrash made those comments before they seemed to hit a wall on device sales and had to kind of re-architect the company and the focus of VR within Meta. So I think that was, at the time, probably the right thing for him to say to you. But I think they learned economically that perhaps the market wasn't in that place. And
we could do a war on that one. Yeah, go keep going.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Apple clearly is committed. Let's talk about Apple for a minute. They're clearly committed to the Apple Vision Pro and Vision OS heritage. And, whether that means that Apple Vision Pro as a product line will exist in its form that it's in now or not, the OS itself and the platform is here to stay. I mean, if you look back at Apple's history of launching platforms, you have to go back to 1998 for the last time they killed a platform, which was Newton. Steve Jobs just came back to Apple. He wanted to simplify things. He got rid of the Newton. The prior year, they got rid of another platform called Pippin, which was a gaming console to compete with the Sega Genesis, and that didn't last very long. But 1998 was the last time Apple launched a platform that they killed. That's 28 years. You can't count the car project because it was an unreleased platform. So some of you are probably like, oh, but what about the car project? Apple didn't launch a product there. So they do all sorts of stuff in secret that never sees the light of day, and the cars happen to just leak. But there's other projects like that Apple hasn't released. So, it's the most advanced piece of technology I own by far, the Apple Vision Pro. It's the perfect business traveler device. If I were a hardcore business traveler, use on airplanes and hotel rooms would vastly be worth the cost of the device. When I do solo travel for work or other reasons, it's an incredibly valuable thing for me to have with me. I'm one of the lucky ones who has no neck strain from wearing a device. I have friends who put it on and 5 minutes later, they're in pain. I don't have that issue. I'm lucky. But I can't really use it for media consumption at home. My wife and I want to consume media together. I don't want to buy two devices. We've got a large TV already. So I love the device, but I've seen myself using it less and less over time, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate. It's just not solving the day-to-day problems that I want it to solve. It's a magical device, and when I want to have a magical experience, I put it on, but it's not a daily experience for me. I think it is for you, right? You've written a lot about this kind of being a daily use case. And
No. I just wrote a piece where I called it a weekly experience, a Vision
okay.
Pro. And so I totally get it, totally understand. It doesn't solve the issue. So going back to the hitting the wall thing, when I talk to Abrash, he's speaking from a research standpoint. He's not Andrew Bosworth. He's not Mark Zuckerberg. He's speaking from a place of research knowledge, or at least research understanding. He's looking at field of view, frame rates, BERT,
Mm.
of how much these displays should weigh. He also, to your point, he came out a couple Meta Connects later and sort of admitted that his projections on where VR was going to go were kind of off. It didn't achieve the milestones he sort of expected them to in the time he expected them to. He's clearly wrong about a fair amount of things. What I'm getting at is he's coming from the research arm of this whole effort, not from the business arm. And what I'm going to argue here on the business arm of things is that the wall that Bosworth and Zuckerberg hit was that there wasn't enough utility in a device that costs $500 for them to reach 1 billion people on a scale comparable to a Facebook or an Instagram or Threads or any of these social networks that they try to pursue. So the wall there that they hit was the realization that in the time frame we can't put enough utility into a $300 or even a $200 headset to do the things we want to do. We can't achieve that. I think that's the business situation there. That's why they go this other route, which is now shipping, $300 or $400 AI glasses, where they think that they can lead with utility there of an agent or a virtual assistant that's watching everything you do. And it can tell you where your keys were lost because it was watching where you put the keys down, is in theory. Even though I don't know that it actually works out that way
Yeah.
in the real world. Like I get fascinated by all these things. That's why Apple ships AirTags, where like the moment you lose something, you just pull up your AirTag and you find it again. And you add an AI assistant to that, and the AI assistant can say, I think it's behind you somewhere, right? Like, because it's got that AirTag signal that's just a little bit of an addition. Meta appears to have tried to short circuit some of these things by just promising or guessing that their AI agents or AI intelligence are going to be able to like magically improve by leaps and bounds to provide that utility on the price scale that they really expect it to. Where I'm going with all that is, 7 million pairs of glasses that they said that they sold last year. They're trying to take that to 10, 15, 20 million this year, probably by lowering the price, adding battery life, adding utility. And they think if they follow that, right, in 5 years, they've got 1 billion people are owning their eyewear. And even if the eyewear doesn't have 50-degree field of view or 70-degree field of view, they still have a lot of people locked into Meta accounts, beginning to use their services, that they can build out this thing that they kind of failed to do at the scale and the timeline that they actually wanted to do in the other market. Bringing it back to utility and that sort of thing. Have you ever gotten a chance to try the Kodak avatars that Meta is working on?
I've seen them, but I've not tried them.
So at that same demo up in the Northwest, they walked us into a room where they had Kodak avatars running from a person, I think it was in Pittsburgh, who was leading the project for these Kodak avatars. And they had a PC-based headset hooked up, and I could put on the headset and look through the headset at this person. And yeah, the headset itself was maybe a little low resolution, but overall, the avatar animated and looked as good or better than the Vision Pro's persona avatars. So
Mm-hmm.
you're talking a year before or 6 months before, a year before Apple's able to ship persona avatars, Meta has better codec avatars running in the research lab. They've got this technology figured out in the research lab. The head of the project is standing there, and the way he framed it is we've got a couple more miracles we need to solve in order for this to be everyday tech. And one of the miracles is scanning the person from a headset or scanning a person from the phone. And lo and behold, Apple puts that software out where you can scan yourself from the headset. You can get your face in there. You can get your hands in there. It's not your full body yet. Those are things that Facebook is going to try to solve. Where I'm going with all this is in a very serious way. If I can clean up my house and make it look ready for camera, and then take my headset around my room and scan my whole room on the day that it looks the best, and then I go and shave and get my hair cut and put on a nice outfit, and then I scan myself with my headset, I now no longer have to have my home look clean for video chats. I no longer have to shave before I get on a video chat for work purposes. And I have the benefit of showing people around my environment and letting them peek out my window or ask me about my books on the wall or sit on my couch with me. I can give them a little tour and I can be proud of showing this stuff off. What we saw Meta kill in the last 6 months was these cartoon avatars and sort of like, yeah, we're done with the cartoon avatars. So I think in a very serious way, Meta's realizing Apple moved the goalposts way further than they expected them to be. And now Meta has to ship a headset that does the codec avatars that I saw in that research lab. And though they killed Horizon Worlds, they kept Horizon Hyperscape going, which is their room scanning technology, doing exactly what I said. There's a very obvious future there where they take codec avatars and they take the scanning of your environment, and that becomes your Meta home. It becomes your Meta face. And you use those two things. You pay for the Meta verification subscription, and your face is locked to you. Your home is locked to you. No one else can sort of impersonate you. And you've got Facebook 2.0, right? You've got their future of their situation. The thing that happened in the last 6 months, and the thing you were pointing out that Abrash sort of realized is I don't think that headset costs $500. I don't think they can ship all that technology for that low price. And the moment you go above that price of $500, you can no longer reach a billion people in an incredibly short amount of time. It's a slower thing where they ship something for $1,500 and then 3 years pass and they can get it down to $1,200, and then 3 years pass and they can get it down to $900. 3 years pass, they can get it down to $600, right? And we're talking 15 years from now, they actually are able to circle back on this.
So I find personas interesting, but I question how essential they are. I think about how I use my phone, predominantly texting relationships, occasionally audio calls, and with extreme rarity, do I get on a FaceTime call. I think my wife and I have maybe done half a dozen FaceTime calls since we got an iPhone in 2007, right? I mean, we're that's just not our way of communicating. We would much rather text each other or just jump on an audio call. And I think this is a great example of, there's extroverts in the world and there's introverts in the world. And extroverts like to go out and hang out with friends in a bar and catch up with their friends, and that physicality and that personas I think are much more appealing. And then there's folks like me who are more introverted, who I'm fine with texting. Personas are interesting, but I don't think they're an essential component of spatial computing. And maybe I'm the outlier here. Maybe that's not what most people think, but that's maybe perhaps why I lean towards AR over VR. Is I'd rather have the world augmented than myself brought into a space. We were doing very primitive avatar. I think we had the first multi-user collaboration tool for HoloLens. We had a tool we could bring in 3D models, and you'd go around the table as these very primitive kind of robotic looking colored avatars, and you could see where they were gazing with a laser beam coming out of your forehead, and you could talk about a 3D model for an architecture firm and these types of things. And that was good enough. I'm not sure that conversation in at least a work capacity would have been improved if I had seen the physical face or body of a fellow architect. I do video calls for work every morning. We have a daily stand-up for my day job, but the rest of the calls I do with the team are audio calls. We're not generally video focused. Some companies are, some companies aren't. I get where you're coming from. I just don't know how important it is as you're trying to build a series of killer apps or components that are compelling to build a platform around spatial computing, how essential those things are relative to just like eye candy and interesting, fun technology that makes people go, wow.
It's fascinating. There's so many interesting things to think about there. You think about face filters, you think about removing the background out of your video chat. So, like, you think of that just alone, right? I get on a video call for work, and it is pretty much a default feature of almost all video chatting apps now. I will blur the background, and you will not see my physical environment. And it makes it easier to join the video call when you've got that peace of mind. And
Agreed.
I think that's true for, preparing makeup or getting yourself camera ready. Oh, I don't have to wash my face before I jump on this video call. Or I forgot to shave this morning. If you take these things out of the equation where you don't have to worry about them at all, it ends up enabling a lot of little things that just yesterday they didn't matter to you. They were like, I'll just do an audio call today. And I understand why people do audio calls, but wouldn't it be great if you could see all the subtle human emotion on this other person's face while they feel sort of protected to kind of like show up as they are? But to your point, like, I think there's room for both types of avatars in VR or maybe all three types of avatars. There's the null avatar, the nothing person who's just a voice in space. There's the fantastical ones that you see over in VR chat. And then there's the super realistic ones that actually represent who you are. And there's multiple scenarios for each of these. I've done a couple movie watching scenarios in VR, and we'll all meet in a semicircle before the movie starts. And then I turn my avatar off and get back. And because I turn the avatar off, I gain the ability to reposition the movie screen wherever I want. And so I put the screen up on my roof and I lay down on my couch, and everyone is in a little square over there off to the side of my movie, and I'm good to go. It's the same as like being able to mute, right? Like, I love having all this control over my representation. And mute is one aspect of it. Turning your camera off is another aspect of it. Turning your hands off should be another aspect of all of this. Just, I want to be able to have that complete control. I think about this example a lot, and it feels absurd to mention it. Like, if I say it now on the podcast, I imagine people listening are going to be like, who would want to do that? And I'm curious to see what your reaction is to it as well.
Okay.
But imagine I'm sitting on the couch, or you're sitting on your couch with your spouse, and you want to watch Avatar 3. There's no way for you to watch Avatar 3 with your spouse right now, even within the Apple ecosystem, unless the two of you spend $7,000 for 2 Apple Vision Pros. Now, you could set up a share play call, hypothetically,
We
and
have.
she plays it on the TV and you play it on the Vision Pro.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there right next to each other. You're watching it in 3D and she's watching it in 2D. And you've got AirPods in, so you're not hearing the audio twice. I think that becomes a more common thing as the software improves.
Okay.
I think it's got still too many barriers right now. But there's lots of scenarios. My wife likes watching almost everything on the TV with captions on.
Yeah, that's very similar to me and my wife as well.
Well, I would prefer them off. And like, I would prefer to watch a great movie in 3D too. So if it's available. So there's a lot of scenarios where it's like, if the headset was light enough, I'll sit on the couch right with you and I'll turn captions off and 3D on. And you can watch it with captions on and just 2D and watch it on the TV. And we're sitting on the couch, still enjoying the same activity together, but I'm watching it on a much larger screen in OLED with 3D and without any distractions, without any captions on. the other day when we tried to watch Avatar 3 with a whole bunch of other people who had Apple Vision Pros, I had to sign up for the Disney Plus app. And yeah, because a bunch of other people in the group had it on Disney Plus and did not have it purchased. So even though I had purchased Avatar
Interesting.
3
Yeah.
and I was ready to hit play on it, they were all getting prompted to purchase the movie because they hadn't. And so I just bit the bullet and signed up for Disney Plus again. I had tried to save some money this month and cancel my Disney Plus subscription. But
Mm-hmm.
no, I had to sign up for it again. And in addition, I had to sign up for the ad-free tier in order for us to be able to do
To
this.
synchronize, right? Because otherwise you're
Yeah.
going to have to take a commercial break in the middle of the film.
Yes. So it's like it's absurd that like I couldn't put on my Vision Pro and my wife is watching a movie in the living room and the Vision Pro doesn't like automatically sense what she's watching on the TV and pull up the equivalent for me inside my headset in 4K and perhaps grab the 3D version if it's available for me. Like there's all those rights holders out there that are making that impossible. I feel like when that software gets solved, this becomes actually a pretty common thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would prefer to turn off subtitles, to be honest. The problem is that filmmaking styles have changed in Hollywood over the last 10 or 20 years where sound mixing sucks. There's been all sorts of articles about this in Variety and other magazines where people just can't hear actors anymore because they're over mixing sound effects or they're over mixing the music. And I've had to turn on subtitles not because I'm losing my hearing, but because styles in cinema have changed. The same is true with how many dark scenes. There are so many scenes now in television and movies where I can't actually see anything that's going on. Someone enters a dark room trying to create a mood, also written actively in magazines like Variety, where there's too much dark scenes. I want to be able to bump everything up so I can see the actor in an environment. Like, what the hell's going on here? So I feel like the issue around subtitles, and maybe your wife is the same, is I have to because I can't immerse myself because the cinematography, the way that films are made now are just different. I can't hear the actors.
We're covering a lot of ground here, and I love it because you're absolutely right on a couple grounds. But I wonder how much of that is due to HDR being pushed on the filmmaking level, and then the display surfaces being such terrible surfaces for HDR. So like you buy a $600 television that has 6 backlights on it and poor contrast, and then ask it to show you all of the detail in the dark scene that the filmmaker tried to capture in HDR. Like, of course it's going to suck, but you pull that thing up in the OLED Vision Pro and maybe you would actually be able to see all of that detail.
Oh, I think you'll see more details. I think that editors and directors go into a pitch dark room to review their edits. And that's not how people are watching movies at home. There's sunlight that peeks through the windows. There's ambient lights on in the room that they're watching the film. And so I think you're right that if you were to put on an Apple Vision Pro, which has, generally blacking out of the ambient light around you, that you're going to probably see that scene in a way I can't see it in my chosen rooms where I watch movies or TV shows.
So let's reframe this. Let's reframe this a little bit back in the history of personal computing, or at least iPhone computing. Do you think when Steve Jobs and the team there announced the retina displays around the iPhone 4, I think it was, and they said, we've actually increased the pixel density of the iPhone display to past what you can see at the actual, average viewing angle. What effect do you think that had, making that leap in pixel density, had on iPhone apps and the overall market for iPhone apps?
Well, I certainly think it made media consumption more compelling. That's one. How much did it affect the general app market? Web browsing, sure, fonts are more legible. I can use a Kindle app on my phone or the Books app from Apple on my phone, and it looks much nicer. But I think probably media viewing had the most impact for increasing pixel density. That's my guess.
I mean, that's where I'm starting to make my argument here, right? Like, what you essentially just told me is one generation reading wasn't really a thing you really wanted to do on an iPhone. And then the next generation, reading full-length books became something that you could actually do on this device in your hand.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
exact same thing is true of VR headsets, and the exact same thing gets solved as pixel density gets past retina resolution inside when the micro display is now 3 inches from your eyes and you actually have to get the pixel density up to like 60 ppd or whatever. Like, this is crazy resolution bump. And so like there will come a time when reading full-length books and actually looking at your physical environment makes sense through a VR headset using pass-through. It's just we're still really far away from the pixel density required to pull that off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's room for growth there for sure. Circling back to your discussion earlier about phones and replacing phones, I think as an industry, we're too obsessed with replacing phones. I think there's a role of the phone quite a far distance into the future, even for spatial computing, as a compute puck, a communications transmitter. There's a lot of weight that can be saved by offloading to a computing device in your pocket that doesn't have to go up on your forehead. And the Specs 27 are going to be self-contained, but there's going to be a lot you can do running a Specs app on your phone in the same way now. For the Spectacles, the developer kit that I have, the device that they've had for the last 2 years, they have quite an advanced Spectacles app on the iPhone and Android that lets you do all sorts of stuff. Update OSs, download apps, do recording, do controlling, spectator view mode, mirroring. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. I think of the phone as a companion, even though the specs themselves are self-contained. I think we may get to a point where, certainly with Xreal Aura, they decided to launch their own compute puck that's independent of an Android phone. But I think we're going to see devices in market that there's a USB-C that plugs into a phone. And you'll see this on Android, not on iPhone, because Android is going to be more open and you're going to be able to do compute, more deep level compute on an Android device than you would on an iPhone based on Apple's restrictions. But I think you'll have devices that compete with Xreal Aura that are going to just plug in on a USB cable, and the compute and some of the battery are going to be done on the Android phone.
I love that. So go to AWE and what you thought of the Snap Specs 27 announcement. I think we're getting near the end-ish.
The two things that excited me most, for different reasons, at actually similar reasons, but a little bit different, at AWE this year were the launch of Specs 27 and Xreal Aura. We've seen Xreal Aura now for 9 months or almost a year. We've known about it, but more details came out, a ship date, a price. And I'm excited about both devices. One, because I think we're seeing the industry, even Apple, look at pivoting form factors. I mean, it's pretty clear that the new CEO at Apple, John Turnus, doesn't really like the form factor of the Apple Vision Pro. He's much more a kind of a glasses or lightweight fan from what we've seen from leaks and some of his quotes in the press. So let's talk about Xreal Aura first. I'm excited to actually have access to an Android XR device for testing that is portable, that is the Samsung Galaxy XR, which is essentially a cheaper copy of the Vision Pro, that was uncomfortable. I mean, you've worn one. I know that there were comfort issues. Lots of people, you can't lay back on your bed because of the dial on the back, and people have done surgery on those devices to try to make them comfortable. So I'm excited just to have, for an industry point of view, a device I can actually test the Android XR ecosystem and have an Aura. So I've pre-ordered my Aura, excited to try it out. I didn't get a chance to do a demo because I didn't go to AWE this year, unfortunately, due to some medical issues, but I'm excited about getting a chance to try it here pretty soon. Anything you want to talk about for the Aura before we go to specs?
Yeah, so I did get to try the Aura at AWE. I felt like the optics were high. It feels like it's a device that is first for replacing a TV screen and then also does all of its interactivity. Runs full Android XR, so you can run all those apps on it. I only wore it for a few minutes, and I would need to spend hours with it or even days to get an idea of, like, if I wear it lower on my nose, maybe the optics feel like they're more where the interaction space is with my hand. So where I'm going with this is, you think of a game like Beat Saber, and my hands, if you imagine a game like Beat Saber, my hands will never leave being raised up slightly from my sides. They'll always be in front of me, but not like 90 degrees horizontal. I won't be holding them up in front of my eyes. I'll be keeping them halfway between my knees and 45 degrees up from from my waistline. So like they're up in front of me, but not super high up. And my overall impression is that like most interactive games that use hand tracking or even controller tracking, a lot of the time the objects that you're holding are in that space. I just feel like in most interactive software, the interaction space is that lower space right in front of me where I'm like, I don't know. If you imagine a table, I'm sitting here at my table right now. Everything that I want to grab or interact with is in this space that I'm talking about. I cast my eyes down. I have 7 objects in front of me right now that I can grab with my hands. I felt like in the Aura, all the optics are sort of like above that space. So like
Fair
I'm not
point.
going to be wanting to reach up directly into that space to grab things that are in that area all the time. But like I said, I would need, maybe if I wore the glasses on my eyes a little bit differently or on my nose a little bit differently, I would be able to have that interaction space. Maybe I get used to it, just like everyone always says they got used to the HoloLens 2 optics.
Xreal is prioritizing floating 2D windows over role-playing objects, right? They want you to put these grand 2D Android apps and media players in your environment and stretch them out like the Apple Vision Pro. And so they're going to prioritize the higher field of view probably because they want you to gaze upon things that are roughly equal to your eyesight straight away versus looking down at your hand. And I think it was a design decision, right? They could have gone wide, they could have gone narrow, they could have gone up, they could have gone down, and they chose to go a little bit up, perhaps, from where the use cases that you would like to use with the device.
I think you nailed it, and I did get Xreal on my podcast here, and the representative from Xreal totally said exactly what you just said. The use case is content consumption. It is for these 2D screens that are sort of floating in front of you. And for all of that, if that ends up being 90% of what you're going to do in these devices anyways, Xreal probably has just a match made in heaven there for like interacting with that type of content. What sort of holds me back is like, I want to be spending 90% of my time in interactive content with media also playing in part of my field of view. So like, I'd love to play a game of chess. It's sitting on a table in front of me.
Right.
And I'm just reaching out and grabbing a piece and moving it. But the whole time I'm playing the game of chess, I've got that movie playing in the background and I'm actually watching the movie while waiting for the person to make their turn somewhere out there in the world. And I don't feel like that's not what this device is yet.
Yeah. But I'm excited to have it for testing. I mean, I've had to ignore the Android XR ecosystem as I'm not willing to buy a Samsung Galaxy XR. So it's great to have at least another device in market this year that I can test things and get a better fluency on that platform.
And it's going to be portable. It's going to go places with you, right? You're going to be able to fit it and pull it out of your pocket potentially.
Although I just saw a video review today where they showed the carrying case and it was a bit larger than I was hoping for. I'm trying to figure out where in my backpack it would actually fit. That's the challenge. It was a fairly robust kit, right? They have to fit in not only the glasses and the puck and the cables, but they need to fit in some cushioning so that you don't destroy it in transit. And it was pretty beefy, all things considered. It was a video review today. It's the first time I've ever seen their carrying case publicly today.
And then, so let's talk about specs a little bit here before we close out here. And
well, I know you didn't get a demo, and let's talk about that. So I think what happened, here's my speculation, I don't have any inside information at all, is that Snap had a non-movable launch date with AWE. They spent a lot of money to sponsor AWE, and there were expectations that they were going to announce the product and show it off. And, new products are hard. They just probably weren't ready to demo at a quality that they'd be happy with. This happens all the time in tech. You're racing against a deadline. It's just not there. And so the best they could do was put it underneath a glass container and maybe, show Evan, the CEO, walking around with it to do some press conversations. But I think the intention, if I were to look back 6 months, my guess is the intention would have been that they probably wanted to be demo ready at the event and they couldn't. And the problem with that is then all of the press coverage is going to be about aesthetics and price. That's all they're going to cover, right? They have nothing else to talk about besides aesthetics and pricing. And on the aesthetic side, there was a lot of cheeky jokes I don't think that were fair, like Evan's bent ear and that video from CNBC. There's since been videos that Specs has put out of developers coming and trying on the Specs 27 in their environment, and people look pretty darn normal to me. Yes, they're larger than a pair of glasses or even a pair of sunglasses, but they don't look awkward to me. They don't look geeky the way that I think a lot of people are unfairly kind of putting the finger on it. Perhaps I'm less sensitive to aesthetics because the technology is more important to me. On the pricing side, it was definitely higher than I was hoping for. And I think had we not had the constrained issues with memory, they were probably aiming for an under $2,000 price point. And I think they just got bumped up to $2,195 due to the increase in RAM prices, just like everybody else, just like the Steam frame, just like the Steam machine. Like all of these devices are being affected by RAM pricing. So I think that was their intention. My guess is that the tech demos, which will happen probably a few weeks before the product launch, will probably be quite positive. I think that they're getting unfair critique because all they've got, again, is the aesthetics and pricing that the journalists who are on deadline and have to write an article that day, that's all they could really talk about. The price puts them at a prosumer level, not a mass market. So we're not talking about a product that's going to sell more than, tens of millions, maybe single digit millions. But I think generation 2 and generation 3 are going to see much larger numbers. I love the fact that they're shooting for the moon. I love the fact that they're doing a self-contained device. When you look at the bottoms-up approach of Meta, which is like, let's start with sunglasses that look good and let's add cameras, video, audio, and some AI, and let's build up to a vision. I like these guys who just shoot for the moon and go, let's do the whole thing. We're going to have to sacrifice on aesthetics, but we're going to have true spatial computing, binocular spatial, AR displays. I love that stuff. And it's hard. It's hard to do self-contained AR glasses. They're going to have to pay an innovator's tax, right? They had to spend a lot of money in the same way that Microsoft had to spend billions and billions of dollars to launch HoloLens because they were first. And the great thing is even though it's a public company, the two founders, Evan and Bobby, they control the majority of voting shares in Snap. So they have a vision. They're going to execute on that vision. And they're going to have some ability to ignore the ups and downs of the stock price to execute on this vision. And I hope they're right. I hope their vision is right, and I hope they can get this device down in size, weight, and price over the course of 2 or 3 generations. But it's a full platform. I mean, they have a full operating OS. They've got a full developer tool, Lens Studio. I've been coding in it using Claude. I've had a lot of fun with it. So I'm actually very excited about their launch, and I totally get that there are people who are not. But I think for me, they're shooting for the moon, and I love the big vision.
I love all that. So I was devastated that they didn't have those demos.
Of course.
So Snap paid for me to fly out there. So I went to AWE at all because Snap paid for my trip. So I'm very thankful that I was able to go out there and try out the event. I mean, getting to see everything. Got some great demos out there of other things. To recap for people that might not have known how this went down. So Snap is a big sponsor of AWE. They have sort of the biggest floor space dedicated to their products. And it was really, they did sort of like this magic trick where you went up the escalator to the keynote room at the Long Beach Convention Center, and you passed through all of the spectacles signage. It looked very much like it did previous years or last year, where it's got the big yellow spectacles with cursive text on it as you're going in, and all the people have spectacle shirts on. And then you get there, you get in line for the keynote, go inside, all these people file in, they close the doors on us. Evan comes out and announces all the details, the $2,200. I don't think I'm going to be buying the thing. It's just not the right product at the right time for me. If I have $1,000, I'm going to put it into a Steam frame in the near future. The thing that I'm going to be missing out on without that purchase is that magnetic charging cord and bringing video in from a nearby device. The idea that it can do both those things and potentially get no battery anxiety and also bring in video from a nearby device, as well as it being magnetic connector. All that is just, I can't wait to see how that works. I can't wait to try it if that works as well as it could. And Snap has done an incredible job with their software in the past. Like,
oh my God, yes.
Their mobile app has been incredibly slick.
They have been innovating in AR on the phone. I mean, Snap launched with a vision around AR, and arguably they've been putting more energy and research into AR than most companies. I mean, there's on one hand, I could name a set of companies that were putting in more money and more effort into innovating in this space, which is they're an underdog. I mean, when you look at their market cap relative to Apple and Google and Meta, they're tiny. They've been so focused on the space, on the phone, and then bringing it to a wearable that people underestimate how much tech and innovation they've already done.
Yeah, they've been at it for so long, for a decade, for as long as everyone else. And gosh, the vending machine for the spectacles glasses was such a cool, slick thing. Everything they've done has been so forward thinking, even if like field of view has been such a constraint and all that. But yeah, just beautiful work that they've done again and again. But back to this magic trick, I had to finish off this sort of story. So you go in this room, they do the whole announcement, and then we come out and they have reskinned the entire demo area from when you walked in. So they've ripped down all the yellow branding and they've replaced it with the clean specs branding. All the booth people
black and white
switched.
imagery, and
they're all switched into the new shirts. They've got the try on kiosks where you can get a feel for how the glasses would look on your actual face just by walking by it. And it was just you could just imagine it being a very Steve Jobs-esque, like you could imagine them really trying to emulate that sort of magic trick of like you went in seeing all this old stuff, you came out and it was all the new stuff. But again, exactly what you said at the start of the outset of this is it did very much feel like they were leading to demos that did not happen. And that ended up being a heartbreaking moment for media coverage, I suppose, for both. I think the journalists who had to write those things, right? They really wished they could have tried it, I assume. At the end of the day. And so that's my long-winded way of saying I left there going like, what am I going to say about Snap? I didn't see anything, so I don't really want to write anything. I did an interview with them and I asked them some questions, and the answers I got out of the interview didn't feel like they were like sort of digging any new ground. And so like I just have that interview sitting on my phone where it's like I don't really have anywhere to put this because it's not anything of detail there. Did you ever go to LeapCon? Or were you ever part of the Magic Leap? Did you ever buy a Magic Leap device?
I did buy a Magic Leap device. And I did follow along, but obviously they oversold their vision with the jumping whale. There was that hilarious video of the guy. It was one of these like 7-minute vines or whatever, where it shows the jumping whale and then it shows the rock monster in like 640 by 480 resolution throwing a boulder with kind of the sad trombone sound. And that, they just oversold the vision. And I get it. Roni got really excited about the vision of what Magic Leap could be in the future, and they had to start somewhere, and they had to start at a pixelated display, see-through display, and they let the market down.
We'll see if Snap's able to do it. Like if their expectations are small enough, if they're able to like build or have a plan to build to Gen 2 or Gen 3 after this, maybe they can eke out a market here. But I'm skeptical, and it's tough to feel this deja vu where I went to that LeapCon conference and back was it, I think 2018, and I cornered Roni Abovitz back then and put him on the record for the first time where he's very guarded before that event. But to his credit, I walked up to him with my phone and interviewed him straight up and asked him all my hard questions where he's like sort of critical of VR optics at the time and speaking up his optics considerably. And he answered all of my questions back then. But like the takeaway on that event was like, it's sort of what I said was like, I went to a lot of Oculus Connects even before that event, and LeapCon and that conference seemed like a statement from him that like now is AR's moment to build hype, and we're supposed to like build on this moment in a very substantial big way. And then of course COVID came around 2020, and I think they even blame COVID a little bit for their inability to raise another round and get to that next stage. And I don't know how fair that is. I just don't know if there was enough there for them to actually raise another round and reach that next bit. But where I'm going with the deja vu there is I'm of two minds about this. I see plenty of these gigantic glasses on people's faces. Like, there are plenty of completely dumb glasses that are nothing more than fashion statements, but they're big, honking, giant things on people's faces, and no one calls those out as being ugly, even though they're like giant things on people's faces. When you compare the Snap Specs to those giant fashion statement glasses, they're actually smaller than some of those fashion statement glasses. But back to the utility. Are people going to get real utility out of this? Are people going to watch a 2-hour movie on the Specs with a battery pack on their side? If I was able to get the Specs on and I was able to have that great movie experience for 2 hours, 3 hours, and I finish the movie experience and I keep the glasses on, they just let them be transparent after that, and I don't feel discomfort. Like, I don't feel any kind of discomfort. I want to keep them on after that. That'll finally bring me around. But obviously that's still in the future. I still haven't done that demo. All right. We have talked here for quite a long time. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we close off today?
Well, just looking at 2026, to me, the things that excite me most are the Snap 27, the Specs 27 launch from Snap, the Xreal Aura, and actually the Pico Swan. Kind of the unspoken dark horse of this year could be the fact that Pico, which has historically copied Meta's product line, they're going to launch their version of the Meta product that was delayed to next year sooner than Meta. And so what will that be like for, there's this Project Phoenix that Meta has, which is this device that's kind of AR, VR, kind of their version of the Vision Pro. Not a lot is known about Project Phoenix, but the Project Swan from Pico is their version of that, and that's in private testing now with beta testers, and will certainly ship before the end of the year. I'm watching that one out of curiosity to see how that perhaps disrupts Meta's plans, especially if Meta is going to move up their announcement of Project Phoenix to Meta Connect this year. We'll see. I think Samsung kind of did their initial attempt with Galaxy XR and didn't have a success, and seems to be on the verge of launching some AI glasses. We'll see if they have AR glasses in their pipeline soon. But Samsung's kind of running behind right now. I'm kind of trying to follow them. Obviously, the Valve Steam Frame is a big launch this year. I'm not a gamer personally that much, so it's not as interesting to me as I think it is to you. The thing that bugs me most this year are the way the market misinterprets monocular displays as AR. We're seeing a launch of all of these monocular wearables, and people are calling them AR glasses, and it's just driving me bonkers because that's not what it is. It's a heads-up display. It's no different than Google Glass, but slightly larger in one eye, and that's not AR. AR needs depth. Depth needs two screens. It needs to be binocular, not monocular. And I'm losing that argument. I think the market's there's so much confusion that people don't know the difference between a monocular AI glasses and AR glasses. And that's just something the market's going to have to educate people on.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there. I am very excited about some of the products out there. I hope that they do well. Let me just take two pieces of software as an example. Walkabout Mini Golf and 11 Table Tennis are two of the finest pieces of VR software ever developed. The thing that's insane about these two products is, in the case of Walkabout Mini Golf, it only requires one controller. So you can get out there and play 150 holes of mini golf across all these different beautifully designed courses that have surprises around every corner, hand designed in VR for VR. And you only need one dang controller to enjoy all of that. It's just a brilliant piece of software. But then you take something like 11 Table Tennis, where the dev has spent a decade now religiously trying to recreate ping pong table tennis to the highest degree imaginable. And they've gone from outside in to inside out tracking. They've had to keep up with, they've had to reproduce the game using these new systems. But I went into it a little bit in my previous haptics podcast that I did with Ashley Huffman. But in the case of 11 Table Tennis, I am required to have both controllers present to play that game in VR. And that drives me insane because that is a game where I should feel like I'm holding a ping pong ball in one hand, and I'm convinced that can be done with the haptics of a watch or a wristband, and then I've got my paddle in my other hand. There are a lot of situations where I want a very a very good controller in one hand for a VR game. Pistol Whip is another great game where a lot of that game can be played with exactly one gun in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to play with two guns, and it feels amazing to steady your hand with the other hand. So you take those three games and give me a VR headset that just has me take that one controller with me wherever I go, bundles those three games with the headset, and make sure that each of those three games is fully supported on that headset with just one controller. So like give me 11 table tennis where I can feel like the ping pong ball is in my hand, but I don't have to hold a controller there. And man, like that would be a dream come true. Like I don't want to be traveling everywhere with a set of two controllers. I really just want a couple of these one controller games and I would be very happy. I'd get all the haptics I want out of my dominant hand and get going.
Like you're going to be potentially quite happy then with the Steam frame because it sounds like they're going to open up hardware accessories pretty quickly to third parties, and someone could easily build that as a Steam frame accessory.
We'll see how the market develops there, but yes, I am on the Steam frame hype train. I did try the headset late last year, Valve's headquarters. I laid down in that headset on their couch, and I was ready to just spend the rest of my day there if they would have let me, messing around on the Linux desktop and seeing what evil things I could get up to with some folder systems in Linux.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Valve's going to have a surprise. People are underplaying how well that headset's going to perform. I hope some excitement returns to the VR market when that one ships, and maybe we'll see that give some renewed interest in the VR market from some of the other players. Thank you so much for the time, Raven. And
You are welcome, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, we'll talk to you in the future, and have a great time out there with your specs when they ship. And can't wait for you to get your hands on the Xreal Aura. Let me know what you think, and hopefully we'll have you on back again
Absolutely.
sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you.